Welcome everyone. We'll be starting in about 4 minutes. Welcome everyone. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes.
Hello everyone, happy Thursday. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on improving your team's efficiency with Office 365 and SharePoint. My name is Tara Harms and I'm the Director of Training and SharePoint Services here at Spindustry. After today's webinar, I'll be sending everyone the slides and a link to the recording of the webinar, as well as a link to register for our next webinar in our series on SharePoint best practices. This is definitely one you don't want to miss. I will now turn it over to our presenter, Jared Edge. Thank you again for joining us. Jared?
Thanks, Tara. All right, so as Tara said, today's webinar is improving your team's efficiency with Office 365 and SharePoint. And kind of the core, my name is Jared Edge, and I'm happy to be here to, and I'm happy that you guys have joined us so that I could share with you as much as I could. At Spindustry, we're really passionate about SharePoint. We love every aspect of it, and we just wanted to be able to present these webinars to kind of share with our partners and with our friends and with prospective customers, just a little bit about how we feel about SharePoint and the ways that it can help you. So through this series, we're trying to solve everyday problems. Before we begin, I just wanted to say one thing, and that is we have a lot to cover. If you know me, you know I'm going to fill this entire hour with information. So if you have questions, we want you to ask your questions, but go ahead and type them into the questions window. Tara will get all of those, and then even if we end at an hour, you're welcome to stay, and I will try to answer all the questions that we have after the hour session. So that way, those who have to go will actually get all the information they were looking for in the webinar as well. So we appreciate you guys doing that. So today's webinar, we're really trying to just cover a few different things, like common workflow scenarios that are solved by Microsoft SharePoint, and then also common workflow scenarios that could be solved by Microsoft Flow, a newer offering in the Office 365 environment. So we want to take a look at both of those. I do have some examples to show you, some demos to show. So I'm going to talk for just a little bit up front, and then we're going to jump into some demos. So the way we'll get through today is we'll talk about what is workflow and just kind of give a brief description of it to bring everybody up to the same page or up to speed. Then we'll look at common workflow scenarios. Then we'll look at the types of workflows inside of SharePoint, and then we'll look at the types of workflows inside of Microsoft Flow. And I know that some of you haven't heard of Flow yet, or you're either new to Flow. And so I'll just talk a little bit about the environment itself and a few things that we've learned so far out of it. It's still, in my opinion, kind of young for technology and always evolving. So we'll get there, and we'll have a nice little chat about Microsoft Flow. There are also third-party solutions for workflow, so we'll mention a couple of those as well. But I do intend to give examples of out-of-the-box workflow, like approval or feedback workflows, some SharePoint Designer workflows, and then also some Microsoft Flow workflows. So I'll do examples for all of those. So we should have a pretty good time here. Let's go ahead and dive in. I want to try to save as much time as possible for the demos that we have. So what is workflow? Okay, and all of you know exactly what workflow is. You may not call it workflow. Some of you call it processes, things like that. If you go to the store, you're doing a workflow. If you go to an ATM machine, I don't know if anybody goes to ATM machines anymore, but if you go to one of those, there's a workflow involved in that as well. If you go to a gas station and you put your credit card in to pay for gas, there's a workflow involved in that. It's really just the flow of the work, and that could come in many fashions. So it could be a very simple process. Like, say, routing a document from someone around. For example, I go to a meeting, we all work on a specific document together, and I'm the one who's responsible for kind of putting it all together, fine-tuning it, and then I'm going to send it out to my team and say, hey, could you give me feedback on this? A lot of you do that maybe in an email today, but I'm telling you there's a much better way to do it if you just allow SharePoint or Microsoft Flow to help you with some of those things. And then maybe like a notification workflow, or, hey, a new sales document has been added to a specific library somewhere, and I want to be notified that, hey, there's a new sales document out here that I could take advantage of and go out and sell our new products, or we made modifications to a specific sales product. I want to be notified, or I want my sales team to be notified about those things. So it could be something very simple. And I'm going to give you a way to do very simple workflow called out-of-the-box workflow. And you're going to think, my gosh, anyone could have accidentally figured out how to use this, and it's just that simple. But then it might be a little bit more complex, where you're doing something like a leave request. And for things like that, or PTO, things like that, maybe Tara goes and she submits a PTO, but the system needs to say, okay, well, who's her manager? And then actually make that decision and route it to the correct person. And so maybe it's a little bit more complex than just a simple routing that you might have done through an email. Maybe it's just a little bit more, and we want to have the system do something special there. So we step up to a different type of workflow, and I'll talk about how we get that inside of SharePoint. But really, it could just be things like registering for an employee training, and I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper in that, or onboarding a new employee. So onboarding processes, we found that most of our clients, all of our clients, have an onboarding process, but most of them don't have a piece in place to handle that onboarding. And so SharePoint and Microsoft Flow, they can handle that type of process for you. So we'll talk more about that maybe at the end as well, if we have time. And then maybe it's just enforcing business rules. So recently we had a client who had a whole array of documents, and one of the rules was, if it's expired, we don't want that visible to anyone in the environment. So we enforce that in a couple of different ways. One is that we set an expire date inside of there, and we fine-tuned search to never search for anything that was expired. But in addition to that, what we want is the responsibility of the publisher of that document to go and clean this document up, to decide whether it's actually really expired, or whether it can be renewed to a new date, or whether it should just be removed from the system altogether, to keep great document hygiene inside of our environment. And so we set up some workflow inside of there to go through and manage that process for them. And the end result is, instead of purchasing some $250,000 environment to do that one simple thing, SharePoint could have done it for them. We went out and did the entire process inside of SharePoint. So those are some things that workflow could actually do for you. And like I said, you all understand processes. So if you just think about some of those processes, so I want everybody, your work right now, your homework, your class participation is to put into your mind right now some type of process that you do every day where you think, gosh, I really think that could be automated. So think about that, and as we go through, let's see if we can, in your mind, you can see how that could be automated inside of Microsoft SharePoint or Microsoft Flow. All right. So some common scenarios to add on to what we were just talking about. So you might have routing style workflows, and so SharePoint offers different types of workflows specifically for that. So does Microsoft Flow. But maybe it's just I need feedback, like we were talking about before. And I think everyone has this scenario where they're the person who you have someone in your organization, you have a meeting, let's say with board members even, because they don't really write all the stuff down. So you have this one person writing all the notes, they write it all down, then they need to send that document to all of the people who were in the meeting. And so each of them get that document. So you send it out to an email out to 10 people. Out of the 10 people, 5 of those people reply and say, oh, yep, there's a change on line 3, you know, and then the other 5 don't. But when each of those 5 replied, they all sent that email to everyone. They sent it out to 10 people. Now you have multiple versions of this document sitting out there, and the person who has to gather all that and put it all together is having to comb through multiple documents. So then they send out, you have the other 5 who didn't look at it originally. One of those gets the second email with some changes from one of the people on the first 5, and then they go through and they make a change to that document and then send it to everyone. So the amount of documents you have out there is just multiplying. SharePoint can reel all that in for you. So it has out-of-the-box workflows for feedback, for approval, for signature, although you may not need that, and then also for sign-off. Usually the signature and sign-off, those are really just approval workflows, and that's really all you're looking for. So right off the bat, there are 2 types of workflows that I think everyone who's listening today and everyone in your organization could actually take advantage of. Feedback workflows, get someone's opinion, and then approval workflows, get an approval for something. But if you need to, you know, there are also other types of workflows that both of these systems could handle. PTO request, I mentioned that earlier, onboarding request or onboarding processes, document expiration notification, request notification. All those things are things that SharePoint can actually do for you. In addition to that, you might say, well, you know what, I'm doing a lot of items inside of here. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. Well, you're probably really creating an application. So for example, think about a help desk scenario. Really all it is the request. So within an hour or 2, I could create a list that could hold the request information and set up a form for that and have a way for someone to submit the information, so that'll be done, and then also attach a workflow to that would notify the IT team that there was a help desk ticket. So out of the box, I could solve the problem. But now you want it to be a little bit more fancy, and now you want a secondary portion of this where now it gets assigned to one of the techs. And so needs to be a notification for that as well. And then when the stage changes to, hey, we're working on your issue, then the end user gets an email back. Well, that's just another piece of the workflow. And so you're piecing together all of these little flows to make a big application is really what you're doing. And so things like help desk, policy management, facilities maintenance, a training portal, any of those things are possible inside the SharePoint environment you already have. You don't have to go out and buy an external help desk system. You don't have to go out and buy an external policy management system and so forth. You can actually have that in SharePoint in a tool that you already readily use. And when someone creates something in SharePoint, it's always extensible. So you can continue to add to it. You can build a piece of it today, build the second piece tomorrow, and you don't have to go back to the manufacturer or the creator of these applications and say, oh, can you make a code change for me? There's no coding in all of this stuff that we've just talked about. And I think that's significant because that puts all of this in the realm of what an end user could do, or more specifically, what a power user could do. Your power users can be trained to do everything that we've just talked about, and that's amazing, absolutely amazing. So when we're looking at SharePoint, oh, and by the way, don't look at these pictures on the side. I don't want you squinting on the screen to try to see these pictures. I'm gonna actually show you these live, and I'll zoom in so you can actually get a good idea of what some of those things are saying in there. So don't look too hard at those. But in SharePoint, we have different types of workflows. So we have what's called out-of-the-box workflow. So the feedback workflow I talked about, the approval workflow that I talked about, the disposition workflow that I talked about. Oh, I didn't talk about that, but disposition workflows, signature workflows, and then 3-state workflows. Those are all out-of-the-box workflows, which means really an end user could just, like I said earlier, could accidentally figure out how to use those if they're that simple. I don't think you'll use the signature workflow. I don't think you'll use the 3-state workflow. However, I do see you having the ability and the need to use feedback workflows and approval workflows. Disposition workflows means you've kind of moved into the realm of records management, so that a document's going to expire, it kicks off a disposition workflow and notifies the people who are concerned that, hey, this document's up for expiration and what should we do about it. So then you can make decisions on, well, should we archive it or should it be destroyed, move to the recycle bin? put some policy around it. So those top three there, feedback, approval, and disposition, are extremely simple. They're done in the browser, and they are super easy to go and set up. I'm going to walk you through a feedback workflow in just a little while. Then if that's not enough, so let's say that your feedback workflow needs to go out to the team, but you don't know which team it needs to go out to. So for example, if someone enters in information into this list or library, but then they mark the column as IT request or something like that, then I need to route it to the IT department. But if they mark it as HR, it needs to go to HR. So, or if they mark it for sales, it's got to go over to Tara. So how do you handle that? That's a little bit more than the out-of-the-box workflow can do. So what you would do is move to SharePoint Designer 2010 workflow or SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow. So since I have that there, let me just talk about the versions for just a second, okay? So you tell me, well, Jared, I'm on SharePoint 2016. Is there a 2016 workflow? No, there's not. There is SharePoint Designer 2010 workflow, SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow, and then there's Microsoft Flow, which we'll talk about just a little while. So if you have SharePoint 2010, the only one that applies here is SharePoint Designer 2010 workflow. If you are currently on 2013, 2016, or 2019, then you can use SharePoint Designer 2010 workflow or SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow. So it's a really bad naming scheme, but those things still work. 2010 workflow is going to be around forever. They can't take it out of the engine without doing like a complete redesign, so they're just going to leave it there. And so it's always going to be there in any installation you do. The SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow, if you're an on-premise SharePoint, then that workflow is a separate installation. So you do one more install after installing SharePoint to get the 2013 workflow installed, and then your power users could go and create 2013 workflows. If you're SharePoint Online, these are both installed already, so you can use either one. So why would I want to use 2010 over 2013? Because, I mean, it seems older. It just seems weird, right? This is what what we tell our users or our clients is this. If it can be done with 2010, go ahead and use 2010. If it can't be done with 2010, move up to SharePoint 2013. SharePoint 2013 does improve some functionality. It does do a lot of the things that SharePoint Designer 2010 does, or the 2010 workflow does, but it's not always, it has some things that are, I don't know, I want to say weren't exactly correct inside of there. So for a brief example, I'm going to show you later how I'm going to create a document set automatically through a workflow. For some reason, SharePoint Designer 2013 can't do that, but 2010 can. So you're always going to have that fallback as 2010. So we recommend, and 2010 to us runs faster as well, even though 2013 does have certain parts that have more functionality. And I'll highlight those when we get into the demos. So just keep in mind, just because it's called 2010 workflow doesn't mean it's bad. It's still good. It still does the job. But if it can't do it, move to 2013. And then if neither one of those can do it, consider Microsoft Flow. And to be honest, as you go forward, you might start thinking Microsoft Flow from the beginning. So let's take a look. We have some other solutions out there for SharePoint as well. So if 2010 and 2013 don't work for you and you have developers on staff, then your developers could create Visual Studio workflows and then tie those in as actions into SharePoint Designer 2010 and 2013. Also, you can create 2013 workflow starting with Visio. You could design it in Visio and then move it into the SharePoint Designer 2013. And then you have third party. So we have a great tool that we use called Nitro Studio, and it has workflow as well. There's other companies out there like Nintex and such, they have workflows as well. We find a little bit more value out of the Nitro tool for that. So, I mean, if you want a demo or if you want some you have interest in that, let Tara know and she'll kind of give you more information. We don't have enough time in the day to talk about all the things that Nitro can do. But still, what we say that because we don't want you to think that you're stuck with just the out-of-the-box tools that are given to you in SharePoint. You can actually use third-party tools on top of it, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. So let's see SharePoint in action, okay? So I'm going to go and do a few things inside of here. So we're looking good for time. In the demos, I think I'm going to be able to get through all of these today. So we're going to concentrate on a training site, okay? Because I think everyone has an understanding of what it means to be trained. So inside of there's a course resources library, which I have an out-of-the-box workflow on. And again, don't squint at these little things. I'm going to show them to you live. So there's an out-of-the-box workflow on there, which really does some really kind of cool stuff. So if a user, if our staff member places a new item into the course resources library, a new document, a new course, some course material, something like that, then the entire staff could be notified automatically without them having to send out an email separately to them. And then they could all be asked for their feedback, so they could contribute and give feedback on it. And then the person who initiated that workflow could say, okay, I see all the feedback, let's make some corrections and things like that. So very nice, very convenient. I'm going to show you how easy that is to put into place, okay? And I think everybody would have a scenario like this. Then I'm going to take you to our class calendar. And on the class calendar, when a staff member adds in a new date on the calendar for a class, well, one of the things that has to be done behind the scenes also is we have to do a contract for the instructor, the person who's going to create that class. So what we're going to do is have the workflow go through and just automatically create a document set for that contract, and then inside of that document set, the template for the contract's already going to be in there. And all the staff member has to do now is just open it up, change the name in the contract, put an amount in, save it, and it's done. So we've shortened down their process for them and made it easier. And we're also making sure that we don't miss steps. That's the other thing Workflow does for you. So we have those two demos that I'll do for you. Then I'm going to take you through the registration process, which is a little bit bigger. So it uses several pieces, several lists, and several libraries that are inside of here, or actually just lists. So the sequence for that is an end user would come into the site, they'd see some events that they wanted to go to, or a class they wanted to go to, they'd click on it, and then there'll be a registration button in there. I'll talk about that in just a second. They'll click on that registration button, and it'll pop up a form for them. They'll fill in the information for who they want to register, they'll save, and then it'll add that person to the registration list. And then another workflow will go out and send a confirmation email saying, hey, thank you for your registration. Here's the information for your class. We've got it. Then the workflow is going to pause for several days until the day before the class, and it's going to send out a reminder saying, hey, don't forget your class is tomorrow. And that's pretty cool. Okay. And then on the last day of class, it's going to send out another reminder saying, hey, here's the place where you can fill out your evaluation. So we're going to automate all of that instead of having to have a staff member remember to do all of those things. Oh, it's on my calendar. I got to make sure I send out all the information for these for the class tomorrow. Nope, you don't have to do that. The system's going to take care of that for you. And I think that's awesome. And what we've just done there, out of those things that are on here right now, is we've created a brand new application. So you could actually spend money buying a third-party website that could track all that training for you, but you can actually do it in SharePoint right out of the box. And to build all of that, honestly, I could do it in a day, but then that would just be the basics there because I've done it so many times. But a power user who even just started with SharePoint, or just started being a power user, just started with Workflow, could really build that over like a 2 or 3 week period, just spending minor amounts of time getting one piece done at a time. Not dedicating the whole 3 weeks to it, but just build a piece, test it out, run it against some users, build another piece, test it out, run it against some users, and just minimal amount of time there and save the company money. So that's awesome. So there's another piece involved in it as well. So let's say the staff member says, oh, we're going to cancel that class. Well, we need to cancel that class, remove all the users from that class, and send out an email saying, hey, your class was canceled. So I'm going to use a 2013 workflow for that, and I'll show you some of the things that are unique to SharePoint 2013 workflow that 2010 doesn't have. So I'm going to go through all those right now, okay? So here we go. We're in demos. All right, so I'm going to take you out to the site first. So this is just a simple SharePoint out-of-the-box site. I haven't done special things to it really. So it has several lists and libraries on it. There's a registration list. There's a training calendar, which is just a normal calendar. There's a course resources library, which I'm going to show you right now. And then there's a vendor contracts library. We're going to shove in the contracts for all the vendors. So I'm going to walk you through some of that. I'm going to start with the course resources library. So I'm just going to click on that real quick. And I have a workflow on here that basically every time a document is added in here, it automatically sends out an email to the people that I said send it out to, so our staff members, so that they can take a look at it, know that it's there, they can give some feedback about it, and then they're done. So I have 2 workflows that are in process, but I'm going to show you how I would have created that. So I'm going to do that first. So I'm just going to go here to the library settings, and then I'll go to the workflow settings for this. If you were in classic view, you could have just gone to the ribbon and just went straight to workflow settings. And so I'm going to go here. And I'll zoom in on some of these things so you guys can see them as well. All right, so here's the workflow settings. Okay, and inside of it says, hey, you have the ability of, you have no SharePoint 2013 workflows running on this list right now, but you do have one SharePoint 2010 workflow, and I'll show you that guy in just a second, but I want to show you how I created it first, how simple it is. Okay, so again, keep those tasks that you've been thinking about, those processes you've been thinking about, keep those in your head as we go through some of these so you can see if you could do this. So I'm going to click here on Add a Workflow. Okay, and it gives me all these choices for the type of workflow. These are out-of-the-box workflows that you have. So the approval, the collect feedback, the disposition workflow, the three that I said you would probably use. I'm just going to do a feedback workflow because that's what I have. You always have to give it a name. So I'm going to say, let's see, get feedback. Sounds reasonable. Okay, and then I need to assign it to lists. One is a task list, so it can actually assign tasks to people. And that generates emails for them as well because that task list automatically generates an email. And then also a history list so that SharePoint can keep track of what's been done so far with this particular workflow, this instance of a workflow. Down at the bottom, we need to tell it how does it start. So I could say, hey, we're going to have it done manually, or I could say, hey, we're actually going to do this automatically as soon as an item is added to the workflow. So I just do that much, very simple. Okay, I'll go over here. And then it gives me this form, which is an InfoPath form, actually, odd enough, right? And so inside of here, I could list who I want this to go to. So I could say I'm going to send this to Tara. Let that resolve. And then after Tara, I want it to go to Patty. Let that resolve. Oops. There we go. So I got that. Got those two. So what this is saying right now is that it's going to first go to Tara, and then after Tara is done with it and given her feedback, then it's going to go to Patty. So the approval workflow looks exactly like this. So imagine if this was an approval workflow, I might want it to go to Tara first and then go to Patty. But so that's what I could say. So I have two settings over here. If I say one at a time, that's what it does. But if I wanted to go to both of them at the same time, and feedback workflows kind of make sense this way, I would say all at once. So it's going to send it to Tara and Patty at the same time. They'll both get notified there's this new document sitting out there that they could review if they wanted to. And then I could say, okay, well, after those two do their job, then I could send it over to Jared. So that resolve. Not lucky with resolving stuff today. There we go. So I can have it send it over to Jared after the fact, and then he would get it. So the first stage completes first, and once everybody from that stage has completed their items, then it goes to the next one. Now, keep in mind, you would also want to use groups here. So as a best practice, instead of putting individual people in here, you'd want to put groups. So for example, if Tara is the sales manager, I'm going to put her in a sales manager group and then plug her into this assignment here. And I'll send it to the sales manager group. That way, if later she gets a promotion and she's now the CEO, and then we go ahead and move in Patty as a sales manager, then I just move Patty into that role. The workflow doesn't have to be changed. You're using groups, and use those groups as roles, and that's pretty cool stuff. So the rest of this is simple. I want to put in a request here. Please give feedback, or whatever you want it to say. And then if you're manually kicking this off, you can actually add a specific date you want it done by, or you could say, hey, I'm going to give each person 1 day to do their particular task. And then I could say also down here that I want to be notified, maybe, so Jared always gets notified that this workflow has started and that the workflow has ended. So you can do those things as well. So those are pretty cool. Down at the bottom, some really good things down here where you could say, okay, well, if Tara gets it and then she looks at it and it goes over to Patty and Patty's looking at it and Patty changes the document, well, you should stop this workflow because Tara really hasn't seen that version of the workflow. So those are just some things that you can do from the out-of-the-box workflow. That is absolutely simple enough for me to teach. I just taught it to you, so you could now actually go and do it. I'm confident. So it's very, very easy. I'm going to cancel this one because I already have one sitting out here. And let's go back. All right, so I'm going to go back to my list. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a new item, and we're going to see this notify me. So I have my email over here, and there's nothing in my inbox. Okay, and I'll come back over to this guy, and I'm going to add a new document into here just by clicking on the new button. As soon as the modern UI lets me do that. And I'm just going to add some text into here. As soon as it lets me. It's working on it. There we go. And it's saved, but I'm going to change the name of this to Tara document. Okay, and so that's saved. It's in there. It's ready to go. So I'll just go back to the library itself. And it's a little bit ahead of us, I hope. And so as it comes up, it says, yep, that document you added in there at workflow, send for feedback, it's in progress here. And in a few seconds, it's going to send me an email. I'm going to give it time to do that. And while it's doing that, I have another demo later that involves Twitter. So I'm going to go out and send out a tweet right now. And I just want you to see this tweet. It says, Tara and Jared are live in Des Moines. And that hashtag is the important thing, hashtag spin23. And I'm just going to go ahead and tweet that out of my fake Twitter account. All right, so that's out there. And then so later we'll check on that as well. So I'm going over to my email, and I see here that the workflow has started. So the collect feedback workflow has started. I got notified of that information. And right now, Tara's been assigned a task out there, and she's ready to do her job. And so it's automated the entire process for me. It's doing all the work for me behind the scenes. It's tracking to make sure everybody has done their job, and everything is nice. So that very, very simple out-of-the-box workflow is super easy, super simple, and absolutely wonderful. All right, so let me show you a little bit harder workflow. I'm going to take you back to this home page real quick. And we could either go to the calendar if we wanted to, where I see a class on here. I'm going to add a new class on the 22nd real quick. So I'm just going to go in here and click. There's nothing special about what I'm doing here. It's normal adding something to a calendar, but I do want you to see the bottom portion of this, and that's the most important part. Okay, so inside of here, I'm just going to name this, let's see, this will be the Turkey Day. And down here at the bottom, I have this one column that I've added to this calendar, which is just a yes/no column that's going to kick off a workflow for us. So it just says add vendor document set. That's all it does. So if the staff member says, hey, I want to actually add this or create the actual contract for this as well, they just check that box. So they're going to hit save. Okay, so that's all set and ready to go. And now in a few seconds, that's going to be sitting over here inside of vendor contracts. So we're going to give that a couple seconds. Remember, that's called vendor day. So we're always letting the workflow, give it a chance to run. Okay, and then I'm just going to sort this by the class start date as soon as the modern UI lets me do it. There we go. Newer to older. All right, and there is the document set that was created, Turkey Day. And then inside of it, because it's a document set, you can preload document sets with information. So I have the contract already set up inside of here, and that is pretty cool stuff. And all my training staff member has to do is open that contract up, make a few changes, and then send that off to, and I can have another workflow that allowed them to initiate the email to the vendor from here. So whatever your mind can think of, it can possibly be done inside of SharePoint. Most likely it can be done inside of SharePoint. So now I'm going to take you out to the home page. And so an end user would come in and say, you know what, I need to register one of our vendors for, or one of our partners for an internal training that we have. No problem, they can do that. So they would come here, pick out what they wanted to do, and I have the SharePoint Workflow Bootcamp, so I'm going to click on that. Inside of here, the person would, this is just normal calendar stuff. They'd be able to look and say, oh yeah, that's the description I'm looking for. That's exactly what I want. I like those dates. Everything's great with this. And we've added this register now button. Okay, and that was super simple to add. I know you may not have seen anything like that before or seen those things added, but those are very, very easy to do. And so there was no code involved in doing that. So again, a power user can do these things. So they're going to click here on register now. It's going to pop up a form. And I'll show you how the workflow that runs all of these in just a second. My form's on the way. And so this is an InfoPath form that it gave me, but that's just because the workflows, 2010 workflow can take advantage of InfoPath if you have it there. You don't have to use it, but it can. And so inside of here, I'm going to enter in some information. So this is Fred Jones, and he is fred@class.com. So I fill all that information. That's the person I want them to register for this class. He's one of our contractors that we use. He doesn't have permission to the system itself. So I'm going to go ahead and submit the registration. Behind the scenes, Workflow's taking over. It's going to go do its thing. In a few seconds, I'm going to get an email that says, thank you for your registration, or something similar to that. Takes me back to the calendar here, which is great. Okay, we're going to give that a second to run. And over here, we'll see a notification come to me, an email come to me. So we'll come back and check on that in just a second, because I know that's going to take its time. I'm going to just load up the next example real quick. I just heard it come in. All right, so going back to the calendar for just a second. Okay, I'll get that all revved up. So here's my email that came in. It says confirmation for the enrollment. And Fred Jones has been registered, and here's some class info and so forth. And you can make this as beautiful as you want it. You could have links back to the actual class information, or you could copy all the class information inside of here. You could do pretty much whatever you can imagine. Okay, so let me go back over to the calendar now. All right, so on the calendar, I might want to say, oh, you know what, I need to remove everybody from this class. So I have this set up not for end users to do, but for my staff members to do, because I don't want end users to come in and find the remove button for these things. So they would do a little bit more work to get to it. So they'd come in, let's wait for this to finish refreshing there. They click here on workflows, and only the staff members would be able to see that button, so that's not a problem. And then inside of here, I have 3 workflows that are actually on this calendar. So one was the register student you just saw. The other one was the create the vendor documents that you just saw a minute ago. And then I also have one here for remove students that they could click. And then it would they'd have to just say which class will actually take this class and remove it from the registrations. So I'm not going to do that because I want that data in there for right now. Let's go out and take a look at what that looks like in SharePoint Designer. So I'm going to look at each one of those that we did. So the first one we saw was the create vendor documents. I'm just going to zoom in on that. Okay. There are 2 lines inside of here. 2 lines. My power users can handle this. Okay, they would go through. Someone would train them on the finer arts of using workflow, and they could come through and make this with no problem. I have an if statement in here that says, hey, if the checkbox is equal to yes, then create an item inside of the vendor contracts. Ta-da! When we create the item inside of the vendor contracts, so the other hard part of this would be that someone clicks here and they wait. The waiting is the hardest part. That's a song, I think. So inside, at least I laughed. It's okay. So here I have I have vendor contracts, and I'm just filling in the fields. I'm saying, hey, you know, the path name needs to be the title. The class name needs to be the title. The class start date comes from the calendar's start time, and that's it. I just map those values over, and that's very, very simple to be able to do. But I wanted to just mention more about what SharePoint Designer Workflow could do, just so you have an idea. So here are actions that SharePoint Designer could do. And I'll start here with the core actions. It could add a comment. That's not important. Add time to a date. You need that sometimes when you're internally just calculating things. Do calculations. That's really just like add column 1 to column 2. It's nothing fancy. It can log to history list. Again, nothing fancy. Pause for duration. So I'm going to use that in a different workflow where I say, well, I'm going to use pause until date. Pause until the day before the class, and then continue the workflow. It can send an email. So that's what we see people use SharePoint Designer Workflow for more than anything else. They just really want to be able to customize an email that gets sent out to the users automatically. You can do that here in SharePoint Designer. And then I'll skip down through some of the cooler things. Under list items, let me refocus this. Hold on. There we go. So under list actions, it can check in and check out items. So if you know what that is, that's like, oh, really? You can copy a list item from one place to another place. Create a list item. That's what we just did here. Declare something a record. Delete an item in another list or in this list. Discard an item, a checked out item. So someone has it checked out. You can go through and say, you know what, let's discard that because it's been checked out for too long. Set the approval status. So set it to approved. Set a field in a current item. So a lot of times, if you are familiar with creating lists and you've done calculated columns, sometimes you're like, I need to calculate it based on multiple things or something that this Excel really doesn't do, and so, or these Excel little functions don't do. So I'm going to come in here and do it in code, and I'll make some decisions before I actually do the calculation. So set field and current item really helps for that. That's really nice. And then update a list item in another list or in this list. That's also awesome. Wait for a field to change inside the current item. That's also pretty cool. Look up the manager of a user. Pretty cool stuff, right? So we have a PTO request that we have. The user puts it in. The first thing we do in the workflow is say, who's that user's manager? And then we'll send them the email. So we can dynamically do it on the fly. Absolutely outstanding. And then there's assign a task, collect data from a user, set an approval process, or kick off an entirely new workflow from here. So there's some really nice things that you can do in just the SharePoint 2010 workflow. It's a lot of functionality, So let me jump over to our send notification, actually to the register student. So again, my register student, the person clicked on a plus sign. It opened up a form for them to fill in. They filled in the form and hit submit. So that's really outstanding. So what happens there? All they're doing is one line of code, create an item in the registration list. And again, all they're doing is mapping through the pieces of the puzzle. So I'll click on that for you. So they mapped in the field that we had for last name, the field that we had for first name, the field that we had for email. And then after that, they took the information from the calendar. What's the start date of the class, the end time of the class? What's the title of the class? And here's the class ID in case it changes titles or changes names or changes information. So really, really nice functionality. Very, very simple to go and implement. All someone needs to do is show me how do I use SharePoint Designer, right? So the second half of that is on the registration list itself. We go through and we calculate what would be 24 hours before the start date of the class, because I need to email somebody on that date, and what will be 5 hours after the end date of the class. So I'm going to calculate those two things and hold on to those as variables. Then I'm going to send out an email saying, hey, thanks for your registration. Then if I'm not already past the reminder date, I'm just going to pause until the reminder date comes out, till one day before the class. And then after it pauses, it's going to send that email out saying, hey, your class is tomorrow. And then it's going to pause again until the eval reminder date. And it's going to say, hey, here's your link for filling out the evaluation. That's pretty cool stuff. Not hard at all. It's just about getting the logic down. So people that we think make really good workflow developers or workflow power users are really kind of people who understand processes, one, maybe people who work with Excel a lot, too, so that'd be also good. If you're a power user in Excel, you might understand some processes as well, so you'd make a good candidate for workflow. So those are all pretty cool. This, though, is a 2013 workflow, okay? And this guy, he's a little bit longer because I can do a couple of different things inside of here that I couldn't do in 2010. And I'm just going to show those. So I'm going to go right up here to actions. Most of this looks exactly the same, but here are the additions, okay? So build dictionary is new, call HTTP web service is new, count items in a dictionary, that would be new, get items from a dictionary, that would be new. And then they have minor tweaks on some of the other things that are in there. So most of this will do exactly the same thing that SharePoint 2010 workflow does, but the 2013 workflow, a lot of organizations think the same way we do. If you can use 2010, use 2010, and if you need to use 2013, then use 2013. So the cool things that I just showed you that you can do, like build a dictionary or call HTTP, well, the problem with that is my power users don't understand API calls. They're not developers. They're just power users of SharePoint. They know their business processes, but they don't know anything about what's an API. And so even though SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow allows you to do these extra really nice things, it's not for everyone. But having said that, I'll say this one example. We had a client, a very good client of ours, where the person, he had worked with Access a little bit, but he knew nothing about SharePoint. So we trained him in SharePoint and then trained him in Workflow also. He had a big application he was building inside of SharePoint. He did all of this by himself. We mentored him along the process, which was really nice for him. So whenever he had questions, he could ask us, and we would just go in and help him with one part or another. But he actually built everything, and we taught him this pattern that we use for when we make HTTP calls. He took that and ran with it and just built some very, very phenomenal things. And so it is teachable, but again, it's not necessarily for every power user, okay? All right, so those are some really cool things that our SharePoint Designer workflow can do. And I think that's, again, within the realm of power users, I think it's something that's very easy. It's tons of functionality, and it really makes a difference in the way you use your SharePoint and how you make SharePoint work for you. And I think that's really phenomenal. I think that's really good. So the things we saw in there were an out-of-the-box workflow. We saw a few different SharePoint Designer workflows, and then one was 2013, a 2013 SharePoint Designer workflow. So that's wonderful. But you are into new stuff. You know, the dates on those two, 2010 and 2013, those are long past. So you have a problem identifying with things that are old. So you prefer to go the new route. And you're progressive, so you're living in the cloud. You're in Office 365, and you've got all these extra tools that are just sitting there begging you to use them, and you don't know what any of them are, right? And that's just how it rolls. But Microsoft Flow does workflow. Most of what I've showed you inside of the SharePoint Designer workflows, I could have accomplished in Microsoft Flow. Not all of it, but a lot of it, okay? There are some minor things that Microsoft Flow just doesn't do yet, and I say yet because they are building into Microsoft Flow every day. So they're adding to it, adding to it, adding to it. And you have a user voice, so you can use your user voice to say, hey, this is some functionality I'd like, and if other people agree with you and they vote it up, then Microsoft pays attention to that and they try to add that functionality in sooner rather than later. I do find, and I'll show you, that there's some minor issues that are kind of frustrating inside of there, things that I would like them to fix that I'd like them to concentrate on instead of concentrating on some of the other minor things they fix. But that's just life. That's just how it is in that environment. You think you're going to like what you see here. It's very drag and drop, point and click. And it has more functionality than SharePoint in several ways, but then less functionality than SharePoint in several ways. So the more functionality would be this. It's not just for SharePoint. It's across all of your business processes. So if you need to do a Microsoft Flow that has email, that's Outlook, has SharePoint list in it, that's SharePoint, but also has Twitter in it, that's 3 different systems, and you can use Microsoft Flow for that, not a problem. If you've got a database sitting on a server somewhere that you want to keep synchronized with a SharePoint list, Microsoft Flow can do that for you, even though that database is sitting on premise, not even in the cloud. If you want to implement a large business process, Microsoft Flow can handle probably 90% of it, and I would say that it probably gets you all the way to 100% if you're okay with some of the things that it does and the way that it does it. It has a lot of functionality. I'm going to show you all the different connectors that you have out there, and you're going to see a lot of familiar names out there with some things that you use. Even things like Google Docs or Dropbox and things like that I can interact with through Microsoft Flow. So you're going to really appreciate this. So there are 4 types. This is what Microsoft says. They say that there's 4 types of flows out there. One's called automated. One they put in the bucket of button. One they put in the bucket of scheduled, and the other in the bucket of business processes. And so that's okay. Those names honestly don't make too much sense. Yes, the button one does have a button, have to do the button, but it's a mobile button, so call it mobile button. The scheduled one, I mean, it makes sense, but you might have something that's scheduled and automated all together that's part of a business process. So it's a little weird how they name it. I'm just going to say that it does workflow, and I think that's just a better explanation of it. So what I'd like to kind of demonstrate over here is a couple of different things. I'm going to first walk us through the environment and just show us a little bit about where Flow is, how do I get to it, what do I do with it, those types of things. And then I'm going to do a file expiration notification and show you how that works. That's pretty cool. And then also, when I get there, I'll talk about retention plans and how that's failing inside of SharePoint Online. And then I'll do a more modern demo, because we're all social people. We all know what Twitter is, and we don't normally think that I could bring those elements from outside into our work environment in a productive way. And I'm going to talk about Twitter for just a second and see how that works as well. So those are some demos that I'm going to do. And then if I have time, I'll try to show the mobile button, although I don't have a mobile device to display it on, so it really doesn't make too much sense. Yep. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to go through these examples. Ready? Here we go. All right. So in my browser, I already have it open, but I'm going to show you how I got to it. So from your Office tiles here, I call it the waffle, you can go down and you'll see Flow, and you can I just right-clicked on it and open in a new tab, and it opened up over there. So I'm going to go there in just a second for you. But you do have other things that Flow can interact with, which is like Microsoft Power Apps. So a great combination is Power Apps and Flow together. Power Apps to create your forms, and then Flow to automate those forms is kind of cool. So those 2 things kind of work together really well. But Flow will work with anything. So I'm going to show you that right now. So remember earlier I sent out a tweet, okay? And that tweet that I sent has by now been picked up and run, hopefully. So I'm gonna go to my home page of my training site. And sure enough, there it is. From Spin 23, Tara and Jared are live in Des Moines, and there's our hashtag. So the implication of that is huge. So since I'm talking about it, let me just go ahead and finish talking about it. The implication of that is huge. There are organizations now that are using Twitter as their help desk. So you go in, you put a tweet, you hashtag it as something, and it gets picked up by some system and entered into their help desk system. So let's imagine your help desk system is actually in SharePoint. Okay, your IT help desk piece is in SharePoint, and I have external customers out there who are working with my products. They hashtag something, or I'm looking for keywords about our product that have some weird, negative annotations, things like that. Any of that could be picked up by Flow and then entered into a list in the help desk site where my help desk people can actually see it. That's phenomenal. And businesses are doing that today. Whether they're doing it with Flow or not, I don't know, but Flow can do that for you. So that's really cool. I'll show you that workflow in just a second. So here we have Microsoft Flow. Let's just take a look at the environment. About 2 weeks ago, so if you're looking at mine thinking, wow, his looks different than mine did, well, that means you haven't been to yours in about 2 weeks. Because 2 weeks ago, all of a sudden, the way it looked just changed for no reason, which is great. I wish they fixed some of the other things. The design was fine before, but that's okay. So you have the home. You have if you're trying to do an approval workflow, click on approvals and start from there. Here I'm looking at my flows. So I see all these test flows that I've been working on inside of here. But here it shows my flows. There's also team flows. So if I was to give ownership of this specific flow to Tara or share ownership with it, make her an owner, then it would no longer show up under my flows. It would show up under team flows. So business processes, in order to do that, you have to have a data connection, or go down here to data and create an entity, which will go and create a database in the background. And that's part really of the Power Apps piece, but it'll create that database, and then you can create business processes. We don't have enough time to talk about that, so I don't have one of those set up for you. Okay, so let's take a look at one of my flows here. So I have this recurrence flow, okay, and I'm just going to click on it and let it open up. And you'll be able to see that it has a history on this page. So first of all, the dialogue through Microsoft Flow, I feel, is much better than the dialogue that's presented to me inside of SharePoint for SharePoint Workflows. I love SharePoint Workflows, don't get me wrong. And I'm not saying go ahead and replace everything. I'm saying if it works in SharePoint, do it in SharePoint. If you're looking at Flow, you can also use Flow. And if you like that better, continue to use Flow. So I have a nice little dashboard here of what's going on. It says, oh, Jared, you're using a recurrence, so this is like a scheduler, and I see this is I'm interacting with SharePoint at some point, and I'm also interacting with Microsoft Office Outlook at some point. So I have those three pieces of the puzzle there, and that's just visual. That's just what they give back to you. That doesn't really mean anything. It's just kind of giving you an idea of what this flow does, right? But I could just save this. If I like this flow and I wanted to create another one like it, but maybe for a different list or a different scenario, then I could just save this one as something else. So just save it as, and then just change the pieces that I want. I think that's cool, because you can't do that in SharePoint Designer Workflow. The recreation of a workflow or to create a similar workflow is very, very hard to do. Okay, I can run it now if I want to. I'm not going to do that. Or I can export it and then import it into another environment. So if you have 2 tenants, you could do that if you wanted to. So those are some cool things that it has inside of there. You could also put a description. I'm sorry I didn't put one. But I like that I see the history down here as well. So I know everything that's run over the last however long. And you can click on see all and see all of it. But the cool thing is you can click on one of these and it'll take you to that specific flow. So if this flow had failed, I would see the results of that failure sitting right in here. And that is outstanding. So you have some form of debugging that's a lot better than what you have over in SharePoint Designer and those types of workflows. So I really appreciate Flow for this aspect of it. Okay, so let me go back. I'll just edit this flow. That's what I wanted to do. So I'm going to go here and edit this flow so you can see what I did to create it. Basically, I went in and I said, okay, I needed to have recurrence in here. So I went and selected it. I'm going to show you how we do that in just a second, which is awesome. Okay, so I went and selected it and I set up its properties. I went to this next piece and said, hey, I want you to get files. You know, and it's, if you read it just going down, it tells you what it's going to do. So you're going to, I need to every night at 12:30 at night, I'm going to go and get files. And then for each file that I find, I'm going to loop through that and send out an email for each one of those files. And that's pretty cool stuff. So let me talk about the get files for just a second. Inside of it, so if you've used Flow and you kind of haven't, you're just new to it, here's some things that I think you should do and be aware of. Okay, so this get files is awesome, but what it actually uses behind the scenes is an API call. So if I don't know anything about API, that's okay because I can still use it. If I do know something about how API and RESTful calls work, I can leverage that as well. So all I really told it was, hey, this is the site that I need to go to, my marketing site, and this is the library that I wanted to look at. So I had a bunch of libraries in here through dropdown, no problem. Okay, so that was taken care of. And then down here, I tell it, hey, I don't want all the columns that exist in that library. I just need these 5 or 6 columns. So I did that by creating a view on the library and just telling here that that's the view that I want. It doesn't limit the number of rows that come back, so how many items, but it does limit the columns that come back, and that's important. You might actually get an error if you don't put that in there because it thinks I might be trying to grab too much information. So if you get that error and says, hey, you need to limit this, just go and create a view and put the view in here. So that helps out. But what I did to take full advantage of the fact that it's an API call is I said, hey, I'm going to put a query in here. And this is the same information, for those who know what RESTful calls are, this is the same information that would go into an OData query. So if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. This is not to be technical, but if you do know what it is, you can take advantage of that. So all I'm really saying is that the column expire date has to be less than today's date. That's what this is going to resolve to. How do I get that function? Because when I click inside of one of these, it gives me all of this stuff over here to work with. So there's a ton of functions that are out of the box. Don't forget that there's a see more button here because that killed me when I was first working with this because I was looking for something for date times could do and it just was never there. But if you click see more, you get to see more stuff. Okay, and so same thing with dynamic content. So let me go down to maybe another section here. I can't do it from there. All right, I'll find another place inside of here where I'll show you where the dynamic content does. It actually just shows you columns and such that have come in. So I set up this nice get files piece, and then down here in the apply each, I just came down to my email and set it up. So here's where I can show you the dynamic. So I click inside of here and it says, hey, here are the columns that are available that came in from the previous segment. Okay, and so there was lots of stuff in here like the publisher's email address or the modified by, and you can click see more and get more information there as well. So if something doesn't show up that you're looking for, like often I need the ID and ID doesn't show up by default, you just click see more there. So that's pretty cool. The only problem that I have with Flow, the only negative thing that I can tell you at this point is that sometimes as I'm typing in here, I am typing. It did really well that time, but sometimes what it does is as I'm typing, it erases some of what I'm typing. And then I type some more and it erases some more. And that's kind of weird. I think they're working on little minor issues like that, and so it'll always improve. It did really well for me today. Normally, if I had to show this demo, it would have actually done the same. It would have done what I said it was going to do. So this is a flow that I set up. Very minimal pieces. Well, Jared, yeah, this one was already there. How did you get to that point? Oh, what a great question. What a great question. So I'm going to jump back here to, just leave that because I'm not going to change it. And I'm going to create a new flow from scratch. And I'll just create a blank one. Why it has to do 2 pages for that, I don't know. But here's what you can do inside of Flow. This is outstanding. So the first thing it wants to know is what kind of connector do you want to use? In other words, where do you want to connect to? Is it Twitter? Is it Facebook? What actually is it you're trying to go to? Outlook, SharePoint, create a button for mobile, an RSS feed that's out there in the world on the internet somewhere, Twitter, Outlook.com, OneDrive. I don't even know what will act as a contact management system. Dynamics 365, Dropbox, Google Drive, and Google Mail, and Google Calendar. But wait, that's not all. There's more. Look at all of this stuff inside of here that you could connect to. It is insane, and this is growing all the time. So if you like DocuSign, DocuSign's in here. They have connections to it, and DocuSign knows how to interact with Flow. So this is absolutely amazing, and this is why if you're trying to take a futuristic path, so I could either go and say, let me do an old version of Workflow, or let me try to stay in the new version of stuff and grow. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm just going to point and click here a little bit, okay, and just show you a couple things. So let's say I wanted to go to Twitter. Okay, it would say, okay, what can you do in Twitter? So there's triggers, like when a post is created in Twitter. Okay, and then there's actions that can be performed as well. So you could actually post a tweet to Twitter. You could get followers or get following or do all these other things that are Twitter-ish, if you will. Okay, same thing if I went to, say, SharePoint. It's going to say here are triggers, so things that can kick off the workflow for you, things you can monitor, like when a file is deleted or when an item is created inside of a list. And then there's actions that you can perform, like add an attachment or copy a file or copy a folder or get attachments, get files, and all those things. So those are the two things you need to know. There are some triggers and there are some actions, and each one of these connectors is going to have its own types of things inside of there. And I think that's phenomenal. So those are just some things that you could do. I wanted to mention, so I showed you the schedule that I have that's running and getting files every night and looking for the expiration date. The reason we had to build that actually for a client was because we had SharePoint Online, and this is only a problem with SharePoint Online, and they wanted to use retention policies. So every night we wanted to check to see if documents were expired and remove those documents from the list, or send out an email saying, hey, these are going to expire. But we couldn't lock down when those jobs were going to fire off. On-prem, they fire off every night, but in the cloud, you have no bearing on when that's going to happen. We engaged with Microsoft to talk about it, and they were like, well, we don't know, and whatever. And so we timed it out, and they were happening like irregularly every month, and that's just not satisfactory. So we went to Flow instead and used Flow to get through it, and that really worked out for us. So those are, we actually used it. We were using it live for many of our clients, and that's good stuff. So let's say that you want to build like a HRIS system. That's a lot of different workflows you'd have to build under the hood. Don't recreate the wheel, okay? So there are pre-built modules for all types of things like that. So HR, help desk, HR, onboarding, help desk, facilities maintenance, all these different types of things. They're already built. They're built on top of SharePoint, and you can then continue to extend them because they're in SharePoint. And that's the beauty of some of these different things that are being built for SharePoint. So if you need, if you can't Google and find those yourself, we have recommendations. So contact us, and we'll give you some recommendations about some of the partners that we have for pre-built modules. Really good stuff. So our goal for today was to figure out what workflow is. I think we did that. Figure out some common scenarios. How does it work in SharePoint? How does it work in Microsoft Flow? And then just briefly discuss the fact that there's third-party workflows out there as well, or third-party workflow engines or tools that'll help you out with those different things. We did do some examples. We did an out-of-the-box example. We did some SharePoint Designer examples and looked at how easy that would be. And then we also looked at Microsoft Flow and saw how easy it would be to complete some things inside of there as well. So I think we made it through our goals. If you need more information about Spindustry, and all of you probably know us already, but if you want some information about the services that we provide for SharePoint, SpindustrySharePoint.com is our site. Just go there. These slides will be emailed to you, so Tara will be handling some of those things. If you need to contact Tara, this is her email address, and if you need to contact me, that is my email address. I'm so happy that you guys are taking advantage of these webinars. And we're doing these because we want to get some good information out to our partners and to our clients. So we want you to join us for the next webinars that are out there as well. And until then, keep learning, focus on SharePoint. It's really good stuff. And anytime we can help you, that's great. Don't miss the next webinar. We're going to have a couple of different people talking on this particular webinar, which is best practices and why you need them. If you are questioning whether you have best practices in your environment, you need to go to this webinar. We're going to talk about all the things that are trouble points, risk, and things like that, and talk about how do you move from where you are to getting best practices installed. So that's it. That's all the time we have for today. Do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions, but I just wanted to remind everybody that if any of the information today seemed overwhelming or that there was anything you didn't understand, please feel free to give us a call, and we're happy to discuss it and go over it more with you.
Yep, that's true. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have an excellent day.